Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. From daring jewel heists to mysterious legends, every video uncovers the secrets hidden in the shadows. Stay with us, because here, every crime tells a story. In every crime, people expect guilt, shame, or at least a sign of regret. But what happens when a killer feels none of it? This is the story of a quiet town torn apart by a chilling crime, and of one man whose cold psychology shocked everyone. From secret diaries to disturbing confessions, you'll see why some criminals never regret the horror they cause. The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to change. Streets were quiet, people knew each other by name, and doors were often left unlocked at night. Children played in the parks, neighbors shared meals, and gossip usually revolved around small things like who painted their porch or who bought a new car. For years, Maplewood lived in this peace until one late autumn evening when everything changed forever. Laura Bennett was a woman in her early 30s who lived in a small house on Pine Street. She worked as a nurse at the local clinic, and many people in town knew her as someone kind and helpful. Patients often spoke warmly about her, and her co-workers trusted her. She had moved to Maplewood 5 years earlier to start fresh after leaving a difficult relationship. Most thought she was happy, even if she kept to herself at times. She lived alone with her cat and seemed content with her quiet life. On a chilly October morning, a neighbor noticed something unusual. Laura's car was parked outside, but her curtains remained closed. The neighbor, Mrs. Harper, who usually saw Laura leave early for work, became concerned. After waiting for hours, she finally decided to knock on the door. No answer came. Mrs. Harper felt uneasy and called the police to check in. When the officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked. Inside, everything looked neat, but the house was strangely quiet. The living room lights were off. The cat meowed softly near the window, and the air felt heavy. As they walked into the bedroom, they found Laura lying motionless on the floor. At first glance, it was clear she had been attacked. Her face was pale, and the silence of the room confirmed the worst. News of Laura's death spread across Maplewood. In hours, people whispered at the diner. Workers in the factory talked about it during breaks, and neighbors gathered in groups on the sidewalks. Nobody could believe something like this could happen here. Laura had no known enemies. She was gentle, she cared for people, and she kept a low profile. The idea that someone would harm her was almost impossible for the townsfolk to understand. Detective Ryan Carter was assigned to the case. He was a middle-aged man with years of experience in solving crimes in larger cities. He had moved to Maplewood recently, expecting his new post to be quieter. When he stepped into Laura's home, he knew right away that this case was not going to be simple. The lack of forced entry suggested Laura either knew her attacker or trusted them enough to let them in. The forensic team carefully inspected the scene. No valuables were missing, which ruled out robbery. The cat, though shaken, was unharmed, which suggested the attacker was focused only on Laura. On the nightstand, they found a half-finished cup of tea and Laura's phone. Detective Carter felt there was something strange about how calm the room looked compared to the violence that had happened. It was as if the killer had wanted to hide the crime, to make the scene look ordinary. At the clinic where Laura worked, her co-workers were shocked. A close friend, Melissa Carter, told the detective that Laura had mentioned feeling uneasy in the last few weeks. She thought someone was following her at night, but she never said who. Melissa said Laura once told her she saw a shadow outside her window, but when she looked again, no one was there. Melissa had suggested she call the police, but Laura brushed it off as her imagination. The police began speaking with people in Laura's life. They started with her workplace. One co-worker, Daniel Brooks, had a history of disagreements with Laura. He was known for his short temper and often argued with her over small things at the clinic. He denied any involvement, but his defensive tone made the detective keep him. on the suspect list. Laura's past also became important. Her ex-boyfriend, Ethan Cole, lived in a nearby city. Their breakup had been rough, and some people knew Ethan had a jealous streak. He had not been seen in Maplewood recently, but Detective Carter knew he needed to check if Ethan could have come back quietly. The next-door neighbor, Megan Price, also caught the detective's attention. Megan was friendly at first, but during questioning, she seemed nervous and avoided eye contact. When asked about the night Laura died, she said she was asleep early and heard nothing. But her shaky voice made it sound less believable. The town became restless as the investigation grew. Parents kept their children indoors. People started locking their doors at night, something they rarely did before. The idea that the killer might be someone among them created fear. Rumors spread, some pointing fingers at Daniel, others at Ethan, and some even whispering about strangers passing through town. Detective Carter worked long nights. He read through Laura's phone messages, hoping to find a clue. Among the usual chats with co-workers and friends, he noticed a few strange messages from an unknown number. The texts were short and unsettling. "I see you," one read. Another said, "You can't hide forever." They had been sent late at night in the weeks before her death. Tracing the number became a priority. Carter felt this unknown texter might be the key, but technology moved slowly, and he had to wait. Meanwhile, he continued speaking to people in Laura's life. The more he learned, the more he realized that Laura might have known her killer. Someone she trusted enough to let inside, someone who wanted control over her, and someone who felt no fear in leaving her behind. As the days passed, the weight of the crime grew heavier on the town. Laura's funeral was held at the local church. The small building filled with people who wanted to pay respect. Tears filled the room, but among the crowd, Carter watched faces closely. He wondered if the killer was standing there, pretending to mourn. Laura's parents sat quietly in the front row. Her mother's sobs echoed, while her father held her hand tightly. Friends spoke about Laura's kindness, her gentle smile, and the way she always helped without asking for anything in return. The loss was not just personal, it was a wound to the entire town. But for Carter, the case was just beginning. Somewhere, in the quiet streets of Maplewood, a person was walking free, carrying a dark secret. And what disturbed him most was the sense that this killer felt no guilt, no fear, and no regret. Detective Ryan Carter sat at his desk late into the night, staring at the case files spread before him. Every name, every statement, every timeline had been written out, but nothing tied together yet. He kept returning to the same thought. Laura had trusted her killer. That trust was the reason there was no sign of forced entry. It was the detail that haunted him because it narrowed the suspect list down to people she knew. The first person he looked into more deeply was Daniel Brooks. Daniel had worked with Laura for almost 4 years at the clinic. He was in his 40s, a man with a rough attitude and a reputation for being difficult. Many of his co-workers admitted that Daniel often argued with Laura. Sometimes it was over small details about patients, other times about scheduling. He always had a reason to complain. Still, none of them believed he could go as far as murder. Carter visited Daniel's small house on the edge of town. Daniel answered the door with a frown, clearly annoyed by the visit. He insisted he had been home alone on the night of the murder, watching television. No one could confirm his alibi. When Carter asked about his relationship with Laura, Daniel leaned against the doorframe and muttered that she was too self-righteous and thought she was better than everyone. The bitterness in his voice made Carter uneasy. Daniel denied harming her, but his dislike was clear. The next day, Carter drove out of town to meet Ethan Cole, Laura's ex-boyfriend. Ethan lived in a rented apartment above a small bar. He was 35, tall, and carried a restless energy. He seemed surprised by the detective's visit, but not shocked to hear Laura was dead. When asked about their relationship, Ethan smirked. He admitted that their breakup had been ugly, full of arguments and anger. He had once accused Laura of betraying him, though he never explained why. Carter asked where he was on the night of her death, and Ethan quickly said he had been at the bar downstairs until late, drinking with friends. The detective noted his answer but wanted proof. Back in Maplewood, Carter turned his attention to Megan Price, the neighbor who lived next door to Laura. Megan was 28, quiet, and worked from home. She had a nervous way of speaking, and her eyes darted around whenever she was questioned. She claimed she didn't hear or see anything unusual on the night Laura died, but Carter sensed she was holding something back. When he pressed her, she admitted she had seen a man standing near Laura's window 2 weeks before the murder. She described him as tall, wearing a hooded jacket, but she couldn't see his face. She had never told Laura because she thought it was probably nothing. That small detail bothered Carter. If Megan had seen someone watching Laura, maybe it connected to the strange text messages Laura had received. The detective sent the number again to the lab, urging them to speed up the trace. Meanwhile, Laura's co-workers provided more background. One of them remembered that Laura had recently been spending time with a man named Jason Miller. He wasn't from Maplewood, but had been seen waiting for her outside the clinic a few times. Nobody knew much about him, except that he seemed quiet, kept to himself, and had a cold stare that made people uncomfortable. Melissa, Laura's friend, said Laura had called Jason a friend, but she didn't share more. Carter wrote Jason's name in bold letters on his notepad. The investigation stretched into the second week. Carter walked the quiet streets at night, watching the houses, listening to the whispers of a town living in fear. He knew the killer was out there, blending in, pretending life was normal. What unsettled him most was the thought that this person was not losing sleep, not hiding in shame, but living calmly, as though nothing had happened. Then, the lab called with an update. The unknown number sending threatening texts was registered under a prepaid phone. At first, it looked like a dead end, but after checking surveillance from a local store, they found footage of a man buying that phone weeks before Laura's death. The blurry image showed a figure in a baseball cap. It wasn't enough to identify, but it was a start. Carter brought in Daniel again for more questioning. He wanted to see if Daniel would break under pressure. But Daniel stayed firm, repeating that he had nothing to do with the murder. He complained about wasting time and demanded to be left alone. His anger felt real, but it didn't prove innocence. Ethan, on the other hand, had an alibi that checked out. Several people at the bar confirmed he had been there the night Laura was killed. Though his past with Laura was troubled, it seemed unlikely he had slipped away to commit the crime. Carter still kept him in mind, but moved his focus elsewhere. The name Jason Miller kept echoing in Carter's thoughts. He asked around and learned Jason had a criminal record in another state. Years ago, he had been charged with stalking, but was released after serving a short sentence. That detail chilled the detective. It was exactly the kind of history that fit the disturbing text messages Laura had received. Carter tracked down Jason's address, a small rented cabin outside of town. He drove there with another officer one evening. The cabin sat near the woods, quiet and isolated. Jason answered the door calmly, as if he had been expecting them. He was in his late 30s, with sharp eyes and an expression that revealed nothing. When asked about Laura, he admitted knowing her but described their relationship as casual. He said they were just friends. His voice was steady, almost too steady. Inside the cabin, Carter noticed how neat everything was. There was no clutter, no personal photos, nothing that gave away much about Jason's life. On the table sat a notebook, but Jason quickly slid it out of view. Carter made a mental note of it. When asked where he was on the night of the murder, Jason said he had been at home alone, reading. His calm tone made the words sound rehearsed. Carter left the cabin with a heavy feeling. This man was different from the others. There was no sign of grief, no surprise, no emotion at all. It was as if the death of Laura meant nothing to him. As Carter drove back, he realized that Jason Miller was not just another name on the suspect list. He was the shadow Laura had feared, the man who sent the texts, the one Megan saw outside the window. And unlike the others, Jason gave off a presence that felt cold, almost empty, as though something human was missing. That night, Carter sat at his desk again, staring at Jason's name on the paper. Every instinct told him that this was the man, responsible. But proving it would be another battle. Somewhere in Jason's mind lay the truth of why Laura was killed. And Carter feared that when he finally uncovered it, he would not find regret or guilt. Only a chilling calmness that would explain why some crimes are carried out without remorse. The investigation into Laura Bennett's death had turned into a storm of confusion, fear, and suspicion. For Detective Ryan Carter, every step forward seemed to open 3 more doors of doubt. The town was growing restless, and people began to whisper that the police were failing to protect them. Parents no longer let their children walk to school alone. Shop owners closed early, and strangers were watched with suspicion. The sense of community that once defined Maplewood was crumbling. Ryan. Carter knew he needed something solid. Every instinct told him that Jason Miller was the key, but instinct was not enough in a courtroom. He needed evidence, and so far Jason had left very little behind. The cabin where he lived was clean. Too clean. And Carter suspected he had hidden or destroyed anything that might connect him to Laura's death. The detective decided to return to Laura's house. Sometimes small details were overlooked in the first days after a crime, and he hoped fresh eyes would catch something new. Walking through her rooms again, Carter felt the weight of her absence. The cat sat quietly in the corner, its green eyes, following him as though it remembered everything. Carter's attention was drawn to the diary that had been recovered earlier. He had read through it once, but now he studied it carefully. Most entries were simple, notes about work, reminders, personal thoughts. But then, the last few weeks before her death revealed something darker. Laura had written that she felt uneasy, that she believed someone was watching her. She mentioned hearing footsteps behind her when she walked home, only to find the street empty. She also wrote about seeing a figure in the reflection of her window late at night. She never wrote the name, but in one entry, she wrote, "I feel like I can't escape him. He won't stop." Carter's chest tightened as he read the words. It was not proof, but it was a scream on paper, a warning Laura had left behind. It confirmed his belief that Jason had been haunting her in the weeks before the crime. The detective returned to the cabin, this time with a warrant. Jason watched calmly as officers searched his home. Drawers were opened, closets checked, and floors inspected. At first, nothing was found. But then, in a small locked box under the bed, they discovered something disturbing. Inside were items that belonged to Laura, a bracelet she always wore, a photo from her desk, and even one of her clinic ID cards. Jason did not deny they were hers. He simply shrugged and said Laura had given them to him as gifts. His tone was steady, his face expressionless, and he looked the detective straight in the eye as though daring him to prove otherwise. Carter felt anger rise, but he forced himself to stay calm. At the station, Jason was questioned for hours. He admitted to being close to Laura but claimed their relationship was private and misunderstood. He said he had feelings for her and that she had feelings for him, though there was no evidence Laura ever mentioned this to anyone. When asked about the night of her death, Jason repeated his story. He was at home reading, alone. No regret touched his voice, no flicker of sorrow for her loss. The chilling part was the way he spoke. It was not the nervous voice of a man lying, nor the defensive tone of someone hiding guilt. It was calm, almost proud, as though he believed he was in control of the story. That calmness unsettled Carter more than anything. Meanwhile, Megan Price, the neighbor, came forward with more information. She told the police that on the night of the murder she had heard a noise outside around midnight. At the time she was too scared to look, but now she admitted it kept her awake for hours. She also confessed that she had once seen Laura and Jason arguing outside the house weeks earlier. Laura had looked frightened, while Jason stood very close to her, speaking in a low voice Megan could not hear. This statement strengthened the case, but Carter knew it still wasn't enough. He needed physical evidence that tied Jason directly to the crime scene. The forensic team worked again, testing everything in Laura's house for DNA and prints. Days later, the results came back. Among the samples was a partial fingerprint on the cup of tea beside Laura's bed. It matched Jason Miller. That discovery felt like a breakthrough. Carter confronted Jason with the evidence. Jason did not deny being in the house. He simply smiled faintly and said, "Of course I was there. She invited me in." His words were like knives. He twisted the truth so smoothly, as if reality itself could be bent to his will. The detective leaned forward and asked why Laura's diary described fear, not friendship. Jason's answer was chilling. Fear and love are not so different. She knew she couldn't live without me, and she was scared of what that meant. His eyes never wavered as he spoke, as if he believed every word. It was in that moment Carter realized he was not dealing with a man who felt guilt or shame. Jason Miller lived in a world where control and possession replaced love, and where the life of another person could be ended without a single drop of regret. Despite the evidence, Jason remained composed. He asked for water, stretched his arms, and even joked with the officers as though he was untouchable. For the first time in his career, Carter felt like he was staring into the mind of someone truly remorseless, someone who did not see murder as wrong, but as natural. Back in town, people waited for answers. Rumors grew louder. Some said Jason was innocent and being framed, while others whispered he was a monster hiding in plain sight. Families locked their doors earlier, and even old friends began to distrust one another. The crime had infected the community, and Jason's calmness only made it worse. As Carter prepared his next move, he knew one thing clearly. He had enough to push Jason into court, but he wanted more. Something that would reveal not only what Jason had done, but why he felt nothing about it. Because deep down, Carter sensed the real horror was not only that Jason had killed Laura. The true horror was that he had done it with a cold mind, without a trace of remorse, and perhaps even with satisfaction. The detective felt a chill as he thought about it. The case was no longer just about proving guilt. It was about uncovering the dark psychology behind a man who never regretted the crime, a man who could smile in the face of death and call it nothing more than a choice. Detective Ryan Carter felt the weight of the case pressing on his shoulders. The partial fingerprint on the cup of tea tied Jason Miller directly to Laura's house on the night of the murder. Still, Jason's calm explanation that Laura had invited him in made it difficult to use that evidence as the final nail. What troubled Carter most was not only Jason's presence in the house, but also the way he twisted every fact into a story that made him look innocent. Jason was unlike anyone Carter had interrogated before. Most suspects showed signs of fear, guilt, or anger. Jason showed none of these. He looked almost relaxed, as though being in a police station was just another routine event in his life. His voice never shook, his eyes never avoided contact, and his answers flowed smoothly. It was as though he enjoyed the game of evading the truth. The prosecution team wanted more before moving forward. They needed proof of intent, something that would show Jason was not just a guest, but a predator who planned Laura's death. Carter went back to the notebook he had seen in Jason's cabin. When the warrant was approved, he returned with officers to collect it. The pages were filled with short, strange writings. Some were quotes about control, others about fear. One line stood out: "Real power is when they know they cannot leave, and you do not let them." The notebook also contained sketches of a house that looked very much like Laura's. There were notes in the margins about windows, doors, and the best places to stand in the dark without being seen. Carter felt a chill as he read through it. This was no casual friendship. Jason had studied her, watched her, and planned every step. The evidence built slowly, piece by piece. The district attorney was confident enough to push the case to trial. Jason was arrested formally and charged with Laura's murder. Yet, as he was led into the courthouse for the first time, he did not hang his head or show fear. Instead, he lifted his chin slightly and looked at the crowd as if daring them to judge him. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. Laura's family sat together holding hands, their faces pale from grief. Her mother cried quietly while her father stared at Jason with silent fury. The townspeople filled the benches, eager to see justice. Reporters wrote notes, their pens scratching the paper as they watched the man accused of shattering Maplewood's peace. Jason walked in calmly, wearing the standard prison uniform. His eyes scanned the room, but he showed no shame. If anything, his faint smirk unsettled those who watched him. He sat down without resistance, folding his hands neatly on the table as if he were a guest at a dinner rather than a man on trial for murder. The prosecutor laid out the case, starting with Laura's diary entries, the threatening text messages, the partial fingerprint, and the items found in Jason's cabin. Each piece painted a picture of obsession and control. Witnesses were called. Melissa, Laura's close friend, described how Laura had confided her fears. Megan, the neighbor, told the court about the shadow she saw and the argument she witnessed between Laura and Jason. Every word deepened the impression of a woman trapped in fear before her death. Jason's defense attorney tried to argue that Laura and Jason had been in a secret relationship, that the gifts and presence of his fingerprint were natural signs of closeness. They painted Jason as misunderstood, a man unfairly judged by a town that never accepted him. But when Jason himself took the stand, the room grew colder. He spoke with the same calmness he had shown since the beginning. He described Laura as special to him, someone he wanted to protect. But his words twisted quickly into something darker. He said Laura had been confused, and that her fear was just part of her struggle to understand how much she needed him. He denied killing her, yet when asked directly if he regretted what happened, his answer stunned the court. "There is nothing to regret," Jason said plainly. "Things happen as they are meant to. Regret is for those who cannot accept reality. I accept it." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Laura's mother broke into sobs and her father clenched his fists. The jury members exchanged uneasy glances. Carter, sitting at the back, felt the same chill run down his spine that he had felt the first time he met Jason. It was the voice of a man who had no moral compass, who viewed life and death as pieces of a game. As the trial continued, Jason's lack of emotion became the most haunting evidence of all. While photos of Laura's body were shown, he did not flinch. While her parents cried, he remained still, almost bored. He looked more alive when speaking about himself than when listening to the pain of others. Experts were brought in to testify about his psychological state. One psychologist described Jason as showing strong signs of antisocial personality disorder, a condition where empathy and remorse are absent. Another explained that people like him often seek control, and when denied, they lash out violently. Both agreed on one chilling point. Jason Miller would never feel regret for his crime. Despite the weight of evidence, the defense clung to their story. They argued that the lack of DNA on Laura's body made the case circumstantial. They claimed the texts could not be proven to have been sent by Jason alone. They said the items in the box were tokens of affection, not trophies of obsession. But the jury could not ignore the bigger picture. The diary, the texts, the neighbor's testimony, The fingerprint, and most of all, Jason's own words painted a picture too dark to deny. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Jason Miller was found guilty of murder in the first degree. When the verdict was read, Laura's family wept openly. The townspeople sighed in relief. Carter closed his eyes for a moment, feeling justice had been served. But when he opened them again and looked at Jason, he saw the same faint smirk. Jason stood calmly, his hands behind his back, and walked out of the courtroom as if he had won. To him, prison was not punishment. It was simply another environment to control, another stage where he could play his role without regret. For Jason Miller, remorse was not missing, it had never existed. And for Detective Carter, that was the most terrifying truth of all. The guilty verdict brought Maplewood a measure of relief, but it did not erase the wound left behind. People in town still whispered about Laura Bennett whenever they passed her old house. Parents still kept their children closer, and doors were locked earlier in the evenings. The killer was behind bars, but the fear he created had not disappeared. It lingered like a shadow over the streets, a reminder that evil could live right next door. For Detective Ryan Carter, the case was both closed and unfinished. Justice had been served in court, yet he could not stop thinking about Jason Miller. It was not just the crime itself that disturbed him, but the chilling calmness Jason showed throughout the entire process. Carter had spent years around criminals, but he had never met someone who seemed so empty of remorse. Most killers broke down at some point, whether with guilt, shame, or anger. Jason did not. Weeks after the trial, Carter received a call from the prison. Jason had agreed to meet with psychologists for evaluation. The prison officials wanted Carter to attend the sessions too, hoping his presence might bring out more truth. Carter hesitated at first. The thought of sitting across from Jason again unsettled him, but curiosity and duty pushed him forward. He wanted to understand how a man could kill and yet feel nothing. The first session was held in a small room with gray walls and a metal table. Jason walked in with his usual calm stride, wearing the orange prison uniform. He looked healthier than before, as if prison life had not weighed him down but given him structure. He sat down and folded his hands neatly on the table, greeting Carter with a faint nod as though they were old acquaintances. The psychologist began by asking Jason about his childhood. He described it in simple terms: distant parents, few friends, a lot of time spent alone. There was no emotion in his voice, no bitterness or sadness. When asked about school, he admitted to being quiet but observant. He said he liked to watch people and figure out what made them weak. His words were spoken casually, like someone talking about a hobby. Carter listened carefully. He realized that Jason's fascination with control had started early in life. Jason explained how he learned that fear could give him power over others. He told a story about trapping a neighbor's dog once, not to hurt it, but to watch the way it panicked. He described it as, "The moment I realized fear changes everything." The psychologist wrote notes quickly, but Carter felt his stomach twist. When the questions turned to Laura, Jason leaned back in his chair slightly. He did not deny being obsessed with her. He said Laura was different because she tried to live without him. In his eyes, that made her a challenge. He admitted to following her, watching her, and sending the messages. But when asked if he regretted killing her, his answer was as chilling as before. "Regret is for people who think they did something wrong," Jason said. "I don't see it that way. I did what I felt was necessary. There is no point in regretting the truth." His eyes stayed steady, his tone calm. Carter felt the weight of those words sink into him. Jason truly believed what he was saying. To him, killing Laura was not a mistake, not even a crime. It was a decision, and he accepted it without guilt. The psychologist asked why he had kept Laura's belongings in the box under his bed. Jason gave a faint smile and said they were reminders. Not of her, but of what I could do. The coldness in his words filled the room. Carter realized Jason had never loved Laura in the way, he claimed. To him, she was an object, a puzzle, something to control. Her belongings were trophies of his power. Session after session, Jason revealed more of his twisted mind. He spoke about how most people live pretending they care about rules. But he believed rules were illusions. He said real strength comes from breaking them and still standing tall. When asked if he thought about Laura's family, Jason shrugged. They feel pain because they choose to, he said. That has nothing to do with me. Each meeting left Carter unsettled. He drove home in silence, thinking about how someone could live so far outside normal human emotions. Jason's lack of remorse was not an act, it was his reality. He was a man without conscience, a man who could look into the eyes of grief and feel nothing. Meanwhile, Laura's family struggled to move forward. Her parents visited her grave weekly, leaving flowers and speaking softly to her as if she could still hear them. Melissa, her close friend, quit the clinic and moved to another city, unable to face the memories. The house on Pine Street stood empty, a reminder of what had been lost. People crossed the street rather than walk past it, as though the walls still carried Jason's presence. Despite the verdict, the town could not shake the question that haunted them. How could someone kill without regret? Psychologists tried to explain it in articles and interviews. They said Jason's mind lacked empathy, that his disorder made him incapable of guilt. But explanations did little to ease the fear. People wanted to believe killers were rare exceptions, but Jason showed them that such people could walk among them unnoticed until it was too late. Carter, too, wrestled with the same question. He spent long nights reading reports, looking at Jason's notes, and replaying every word from the trial and the prison sessions. He wondered if Jason's kind of mind could ever be understood, or if it was better left as something to fear. What he knew for sure was that Jason Miller would never regret his crime. Not tomorrow, not years from now, not ever. One evening, after another session, Carter sat outside the prison, staring at the high fences topped with wire. Jason was inside, locked away, but Carter knew it wasn't enough. Jason's body might be confined, but his mind was still free. He would spend his life telling himself he had won, and in a way, Carter feared he was right, because remorse was the one punishment Jason could never feel, and that made him untouchable in ways prison walls could not change. Prison life was supposed to break people down, but Jason Miller seemed untouched by it. Weeks turned into months, and he adapted quickly to the routines. Other inmates often struggled with the loss of freedom, but Jason treated it like a new game. He learned the schedules, studied the guards, and even observed the other prisoners the same way he once studied people in Maplewood. His eyes always carried that same cold calculation, as if every face was another puzzle to solve. Detective Ryan Carter continued to receive updates from the prison. Jason's behavior unsettled the staff. Unlike other inmates, he never lost his temper, never cried, and never seemed depressed. Instead, he remained calm, polite, and collected. But beneath that politeness was something chilling. He spoke to people as though they were pieces on a board, moving them around with his words. Some inmates even followed his lead, drawn to his quiet confidence. Carter agreed to meet Jason again, curious about the influence he seemed to hold inside prison walls. When he entered the visiting room, Jason was already sitting at the table, waiting with that faint smirk. He greeted Carter as though they were meeting for coffee, not for another session about murder. "You wanted to see how I'm doing," Jason said smoothly. "I'm doing just fine. Better than fine, actually. This place is simpler than the outside. People are easier to read here." Carter asked him directly if he ever thought about Laura. Jason tilted his head slightly as if considering the question. Then he gave an answer that made Carter's skin crawl. "I think about her sometimes," Jason said. "Not the way you want me to. I don't think about what I did. I think about how much power she gave me without even knowing it. Fear makes people alive. She was never more alive than when she was afraid of me." Carter clenched his jaw but stayed silent. He knew Jason wanted a reaction. That was part of his game. Still, hearing those words made the detective realize Laura's suffering was exactly what Jason remembered most. Not her life, not her kindness, but her fear. The prison. Psychologist warned Carter that Jason thrived on attention. The more people tried to study him, the more he enjoyed performing for them. But Carter believed there was still value in these meetings. Every word Jason spoke revealed the mindset of someone who could kill without regret. And understanding. That mindset was important. Outside the prison walls, Maplewood struggled to heal. The Bennett family tried to move on, but grief clung to them. Laura's mother often said she could not bear the thought of Jason living without remorse while they lived with endless sorrow. Her father focused on keeping the family strong, but even he admitted at times that the lack of regret felt worse than the crime itself. It was as though Jason had stolen their chance for closure. Neighbors still talked about the case. Some said Jason was pure evil. Others tried to explain his behavior with psychology and science. But no matter the explanation, the result was the same. The town felt unsafe. If someone could live among them for months, smiling, working, and talking like everyone else while secretly plotting a murder, then who else could be hiding behind a mask? Carter thought about that question often. He remembered the first time he saw Jason's cabin, how neat and controlled everything looked. It was the same way Jason carried himself in court and in prison. A man who never lost control, who never admitted weakness. That control was his weapon, sharper than any knife. One day, during another session, Carter asked Jason directly if he ever feared anything. Jason leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked on the detective's. "Fear is for people who don't understand the world," he said. "I don't fear. I calculate. If I can't control something, I adapt to it. That's why regret doesn't exist for me. Regret is wasted energy." It was a statement that explained everything. Jason did not see people as human beings with emotions. He saw them as variables in an equation. Laura's death was not a tragedy in his eyes. It was a result, an outcome of choices he believed were necessary. That absence of remorse made him dangerous, not only because of what he had done, but because he believed he was right. Carter left the prison that day feeling a heaviness in his chest. He had seen hardened criminals before, but Jason was different. He was not broken or desperate. He was complete in his coldness, certain in his logic, and that certainty was terrifying. As months passed, Jason's influence inside prison grew. Guards reported that other inmates respected him, even feared him. He never raised his voice, but his calm presence was enough to sway people. It was the same pattern he had shown with Laura: control without force, manipulation without regret. The prosecutor who had handled the trial told Carter that Jason's case was already being used in psychology classes. Students studied his lack of remorse as an example of how some minds work outside normal boundaries. But for Carter, it was not an academic lesson. It was a constant reminder that people like Jason existed in the world, walking among the innocent without warning. Meanwhile, Laura's story began to fade from the headlines. Other crimes filled the news, and Maplewood tried to return to normal life. Yet those who had lived through it never forgot. Her empty house remained a silent mark on the town, a place where flowers and candles still appeared on anniversaries. People remembered her smile, her kindness, and the quiet way she lived her life. But they also remembered the darkness that had ended it. Carter often thought about how Jason had taken more than a life. He had stolen the sense of safety from an entire community. He had shown them that sometimes evil does not come with warning signs or anger. Sometimes it comes in the form of a calm smile, polite words, and eyes that hide emptiness. For Jason, prison would never bring regret. It was not punishment to him, but simply another setting where he could test his control. For Carter, and for everyone touched by Laura's life, the chilling psychology of a man without remorse was a wound that could never fully heal. Jason Miller's life sentence meant he would never walk the streets of Maplewood again, but the shadow of his crime remained. For the people who had known Laura Bennett, every day still carried a reminder of her absence. Her friends at the clinic often spoke about how she used to bring coffee for everyone on busy mornings, how her laughter filled the halls, and how she always stayed late if someone needed extra care. That warmth was gone, and what remained was silence. Detective Ryan Carter continued to visit the prison from time to time, not because he expected Jason to change, but because he wanted to understand him. Carter knew Jason would never regret what he had done, yet each conversation revealed how a person could live without guilt. To Carter, Jason was more than a criminal. He was a window into a mind stripped of conscience. On one visit, Carter asked him what he thought about the verdict months later. Jason leaned back in his chair and gave a faint smile. "The jury did what they were supposed to," he said calmly. "But I did what I was supposed to as well. Everyone followed their role. That's all life is. Roles, actions, results." Carter asked if he ever thought about Laura's parents, about their pain and grief. Jason shook his head slowly. "Their grief belongs to them. It has nothing to do with me. People feel what they choose to feel. I don't carry their pain, and I never will." Those words stayed with Carter long after he left the prison. The detective realized Jason did not only lack remorse, he lacked any sense of connection to other human beings. To him, people were separate objects, and their suffering was irrelevant. That coldness was the heart of his psychology. Back in Maplewood, life struggled forward. Laura's parents moved away after the trial, unable to stay in the town that held so many painful memories. Her father sold the house on Pine Street, but no one wanted to buy it. It stood empty, with shutters closed and weeds growing in the yard. Neighbors said it felt haunted, not by Laura, but by the darkness Jason left behind. The town never returned to the way it once was. People still gathered for community events, but trust had been weakened. Where once neighbors had left doors unlocked, now locks were double-checked every night. Where once people smiled easily at strangers, now suspicion lingered. Maplewood had learned that evil could hide in plain sight, and the lesson was one they would never forget. Carter often thought about the case late at night. He replayed every step, finding Laura's body, discovering the texts, confronting Jason, and watching him in court. What stayed with him most was not the violence itself, but the calmness Jason carried from start to finish. That calmness was more haunting than rage could ever be. Rage could burn out, remorse could soften, but calmness meant Jason would never change. Psychologists continued to study Jason's case. Articles were written about him, describing him as a textbook example of a remorseless killer. Some called him a sociopath, others labeled him a predator without conscience. But for Carter, labels were not enough. What mattered was the reality. Jason was a man who looked at murder and felt nothing. That absence of remorse was not just a trait, it was his entire identity. Years passed, but Jason's behavior inside prison remained the same. Guards reported that he kept to himself, but had influence over others. He never joined fights, never caused trouble, yet people respected him in an odd way. It was the same quiet control he once held over Laura, subtle, calm, and chilling. Carter eventually stopped visiting, realizing there was nothing more Jason could reveal. He had seen enough to understand that some people would never change, no matter how many questions were asked. Instead, Carter focused on helping the community heal, reminding them that most people were not like Jason, that kindness still existed in the world. Still, Jason's shadow remained. For those who remembered, The trial, his words echoed even years later. "There is nothing to regret." It was a phrase that summed up the horror of his crime. Not only had he taken a life, but he had done it without guilt, and he would carry that emptiness until the end of his days. Laura's grave became a place of quiet reflection for many. Flowers appeared often, left by friends, former patients, and strangers who had heard her story. People stood silently, remembering her kindness and the way she had touched their lives. For them, remembering Laura was a way to push back against the darkness Jason had created. Carter visited once, standing by the headstone in silence. He thought about Laura's diary entries, about her fear, and about the courage she had shown, even as she lived with that fear. She had left behind more than words on paper. She had left behind a reminder of how precious and fragile life was. For Jason, the world inside prison walls would never change him. He would live out his days without regret, convinced that he had done nothing wrong. For Maplewood, the story of Laura Bennett would remain forever, a lesson in how evil can exist without remorse, and how justice, even when served, cannot erase the scars it leaves behind. Carter walked away from the grave slowly, knowing the case was over, but the memory would never fade. Some stories end with closure, but this one ended with a chilling truth. Some people never regret the crime, and that lack of regret is the most frightening thing of all. You've just seen another chilling story from the world of true crime, but there are many more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends. Don't miss what's coming next, because in the world of crime, the truth is always stranger than fiction.